So today is day 2 of number lines, and today we're going to take what we learned yesterday about creating a number line and turning that into a line plot. So from earlier this school year, we looked at line plots with whole numbers, and we know that a line plot needs certain things, such as it needs a title for the entire line plot. The scale or the x-axis of the line plot needs a label also so that you know what the numbers mean. You need to have a scale from one number to another number, and everything in between those two numbers has to be a consistent interval. So we're going to start with the example that's on the screen. And at the top is our data, and the information that's given is that this is the heights of students in grade 5 to the nearest ½ inch. And then there's all of our data numbers, and it's kind of confusing to look at. The first thing we need to do is organize the data. So we're going to make a frequency table to get that organization going. So I'm going to look up here, and I'm going to put tallies for each of the different numbers. Okay, so 55, 1, 52, 50 and a half, 50 and a half, 55, 50 and a half, 50, 55, 50 and a half, 55, 58 and a half, 60, 52, 50 and a half, 50 and a half, 50, 55, 55 again, 58 and a half, and 60. Okay, so now we have all tallies for all of our data. Now we're going to just kind of count this up to make things easier. So we have 2 at 50, we have 6 at 50 and a half, 2 at 52, 6 at 55, 2 at 58 and a half, and 2 at 60. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use that information in order to create a number line. Okay, hold on one second. Okay, so we have step 1 done with our data table. So now we're going to turn this into a line plot. So I already have the scale done. I know that I need to go from 50 to 60, and I need to have a consistent interval the whole way across. So what I decided to do was count by ones. So each hash is 1 apart. So we have 50, 51, 52, 53, and so on. Now I didn't write every number down here, but I could have put every single number on a hash. Wouldn't be very difficult. I would just have to put in 51, 53, 55, 57, 59. Okay, but just having those in between lets you know that it's halfway between 50 and 52, which would be 51. Okay, so we're going to look at this data, and we are going to place our information on this line plot. So our first value is 50, and there's 2 of them. So when I go to 50, I'm going to put 2 X's right at 50. Okay, my next value is 50 and a half. So knowing that this is 50 and this is 51, 50 and a half would go halfway between those. There's not actually a hash there, and that's okay, as long as I put it right in between. So I need 6 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's exactly right around a 50 and a half. My next value is 52, and I need 2 X's plotted there. Then 55, I need 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. At 58 and a half, which would be halfway between 58 and 59, I'm going to put 2. And at 60, I'm also plotting 2. Okay, so we need a title here. So our title would be Height of 5th graders. Sorry, it's sloppy, guys. And then down here for our scale, our heights are in inches. So that tells us what all of those numbers mean. Okay, so there we have our line plot using fractions and placing those fractions at the appropriate places. Even if there's not a hash there, putting them in between whole numbers is okay also. Okay, so let's look at another example. Let me go single screen here, guys. Okay, so we have a data table here that shows the weights of pumpkins to the nearest eighth of a pound. So we're going to draw a line plot to represent the data for those weights of the pumpkins that are in a crate. Okay, so our title would be pumpkin weights. And our label for underneath the scale would be pounds. All these numbers represent pounds of pumpkins. Now, my smallest value was 3.5, largest was 8 1/8, which is why my scale goes from 3 the whole way to 9. So a little bit less than 3.5, a little bit more than 8 1/8. So now I need to look at this scale and try to figure out what each of these hashes mean. So between every whole number, there are 3 hashes, which divides each whole number into fourths. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 spots, which means that this is 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. We know that 2/4 is the same as half, so this spot right here is halfway between 3 and 4, or 3.5. So then 1/4, 2/4, also known as 4.5, 3/4, 5. So each of these is 1/4. So let's go through here and see if we can plot these in. So we have 3.5. Knowing that this is fourths, a half is the same thing as 3 and 2/4. So we're going to plot 2x's at 3 and 2/4. So right there, boom, that is 3 and 2/4. Okay, our next one, we have to place 3 x's at 5 and 1/4. Okay, well, we determined that each of these hashes is 1/4, so it would be the first hash after 5. So we need to place 3 x's right there. Okay, the next one's pretty easy. It's a whole number of 7. So we have to place 4 x's at 7. And then the last one is 8 1/8. Also, piece of cake. There's 8. Sorry, not so much of a piece of cake. Sorry about that. So this is 8. This is 8 and 1/4. Okay, well, 8 and 1/8 and 8 and 1/4. 8 and 1/8 is smaller than 1/4 because we know that 8 and 1/4 equals 2/8. So when I do the equivalent fraction there, 1/4 is 2/8. So this right here stands for 2/8. So if that's 2/8, that means this is 4/8 and this is 6/8. Where in the world would 1/8 be? Well, 1/8 would be between 8 and 8 and 2/8. So right here, halfway between 8 and 8 and 2/8 would be 8 and 1/8. So we have to plot an X right there between those two hashes. Okay, guys, let's look at another example. Okay, so this is a line plot for flower heights. So over here in our data table, we have the different heights of some flowers. We have the frequency that they happen. So we want to look at this and answer some of these questions. So what would the title of our line plot be? Well, I think the perfect title would be flower heights. And what label will we use for our scale? I think inches, because that's what all of our numbers stand for. And the first number will be 2, because that's our first value up there. And our last number will be 3, because that's our highest value right there. So we need to now create this line plot for our title and fit it in right here. Flower heights. And we need to put our title for our scale, which we said was inches. Our first value is 2. Our last value is 3. So we have 3 hashes in between our 4 sections. So this will be 2 and 1/4. 2 and 2/4, also known as 2.5, and 2 and 3/4. And now we need to plot our information. So we have 4 x's at 2. We have 5 x's, 3, 4, 5. Ordinarily, you wouldn't go through your title to do that. At 2.5, we have 6. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. At 2 and 3/4, we have 7. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And at 3, we have 2 values. Sorry about the scrunchiness and having to go around things there. I didn't lay that out very well. My fault. Okay. So that is how you would set that up. Okay guys, so here's our last example. This one is about worms. So apparently some worms were measured for their length, and the record was the data was recorded here in this data table. So we have some worms that were 2 3/4 inches long the whole way through 3 3/4 inches. So we're going to make our data table. So we're going to start with the title. Perfect title for this would be worm lengths. And according to our data table, their lengths were measured in inches. So we're going to record that there. Now, I have to go from below 2 3/4 to above 3 3/4. So I've decided to go from 2 to 4. So in between there, I'm going to put 2 1/2, 3, and 3 1/2. Okay, so now we're going to plot our data. So my first value is 2 3/4. Well, I don't have 2 3/4 on the number line, so I have to figure out where that would be. Well, 2 1/2 is 2/4, so it's 2 2/4. So 3/4 would be halfway in between 2 1/2 and 3. So I need to put 8 x's at 2 3/4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This spot right here would be 2 3/4. And then at 3, I need to put 5 pieces of data at 3 1/4. Oh, I don't have that either. So we know that 1/4 is halfway between 3 and 3 1/2. So we're going to put an X right there, right at 3 1/4. At 3 1/2, we have 4. And then 3 3/4. Once again, it's not on a number line, but we know that 3/4 is halfway between 3 1/2 and 4. So there is our line plot for that information. Now, it's okay to have things in between two of your values as long as you know that that's where it belongs. So because I didn't have 2 3/4, I could put the information halfway in between 2 1/2 and 3 because that's exactly where 2 3/4 is. Okay, so what you're going to do now is follow the directions on the screen. You're going to get a data card from the back table and a line plot paper. You're going to make a frequency table and a line plot for the data, and then you're going to do that one more time. So you're going to do two total. Okay? If you have any questions, make sure you ask, and make sure you hand in your paper when you're done.